It's time for episode 7, everyone. We have another great one lined up as we take you through a very important part of the game that helps competitive play tremendously. We hope you all enjoy, and everyone, take it away. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Glimmer Gang Podcast. In this podcast, we're going to be taking a look at what a format is and why do they matter in the game. So to answer that question, I'm going to kick it over to Sneaky. So Sneaky, what is a format and why do they matter in a trading card game?
Yeah, sure. So a format is basically a set of rules around what cards you can use in order to play in that format. And so most card games will have multiple formats. Some will have multiple formats for their organized play or competitive scene with a lot of casual formats, and some just have just tons of formats in general, like Magic. So many formats. But basically what it boils down to is it's a restriction on what you can and cannot put on the table in order to play a game. And so why that matters is because it's going to give you a different card pool for you to pull from, which is going to determine not only potential power level, and mostly it's more about availability of the cards, whether giving you more options for you to use within your deck, which could potentially lead to more and more powerful combos and synergies because you have more cards available to you. Or it could be the other side. It could be restricting you to, say, only commons or uncommons, like in a pauper style format, so that it makes it easier for people to get into it by lowering the barrier of entry to cost by limiting it down to very, very cheap cards. So what we're going to be talking about primarily in this episode are like the standard formats that can be used for an organized play type situation. And so what that's going to do is that's going to affect the card pool, which is then going to determine what cards people are going to be able to play with. And so whether those are going to be accessible or not, both immediately and over time, which will impact both the collector's market and the player's market. And we'll talk more about how each of these two formats will impact that as we go along. One of the primary forms of formats that we're going to be talking about is a rotating format. So, Teddy, want to tell us a little bit about what is a rotating format?
So what a rotating format is kind of just like, basically you can look at Pokemon as one of the biggest examples for what a rotating format is. They every year cycle out older cards, and the newer cards that are in their game stay prominent and they stay in the rotation. And they have two different rotating formats. They have standard and expanded. Standard is the most newest cards, probably in the past 2 to 3 years is what is legal. And then expanded, they have not changed expanded in a while, and it's been from like the early 2010s, which I don't agree with, but that's a whole another topic of conversation. But a rotating format is so important because it keeps the game fresh and it keeps the game interesting. Because like you could, if their same cards are in there, it's gonna get stale and old, and you're gonna have the same strategies. And it also makes sense in the fact that the games are evolving. If you go back and look at the XY or Black and White series cards, and then you take a look at the newer cards for Pokemon, there are so many different stronger mechanics that those cards would just not be viable. The Black and White cards, there would be some cards that would be used, but a lot of the main attackers and stuff would not be used because there are stronger attackers now. So cycling out those older cards makes it so the game keeps up that same play style and the speed of the game stays the same, because yes, expanded is a thing where they do have all those cards and they are prominent, but being able to have the newer cards for a standard format that are so much easier and so much newer in a way, I think is important because it keeps the game fresh in my mind and it keeps the game interesting. And you have to realize, okay, these cards are going to go out of rotation in the next coming year. What do I have to do to make sure I am still going to play my decks well? And say like half of your deck is going to come out. There are most of the time where decks and deck styles will fumble out and not become a thing or not be a thing anymore because of rotation, because the majority of cards that pilot and help those decks help are gone and they're not in the game anymore and they're in expanded. And you can go and play them in expanded, but for standard, it's a so much bigger thing. So I want to ask you guys, what are your opinions on rotating formats and what does it mean?
I have a complicated relationship with rotating formats personally. I do like them on one hand because with rotating formats you can give newer players a easier starting window to jump into a game without actually having to have been collecting since day one, which is nice for new players. Uh, the real feel bad moments that I have with rotating formats, you touched on it a little bit, but when you sink potentially up to hundreds of dollars into a deck, and then in 2 months that deck you can't play it in your preferred format anymore. Say we're talking about standard Magic the Gathering, your deck rotates out. Then what do you do? Like you feel almost like, wow, I kind of wasted that money. Not everybody feels that way. I do personally. Uh, but that's two sides to the same coin. There are good points and there are bad points to it. And also, with a rotating format, you will find that it does, in fact, help with the deck building process because you are forced most of the time. You're forced to find these new avenues for maybe your preferred play style or your preferred deck style. You're forced to, you're like, okay, I have this new pool of cards. Can I pull off the same archetype that I was playing before, or do I have to move archetypes?
Yeah, and I think Sean basically covered two of the main topics when it comes to talking about rotating formats, which is uh, one of the pros, in my opinion, which is it's a lower barrier to entry for particularly newer players. And that comes down to not only with newer cards being more available and thus generally cheaper. The other thing is the burden of knowledge is a lot less. So if you're looking at, let's take Lorcana for example, we're looking at roughly 200 cards per set, and then 4 sets a year. Usually a rotation is about 2 years. So you're looking at a card pool of 1,600 ish cards. Whereas if you look at other formats that we'll talk about here in a second, they could have upwards of 12,000 or more cards easily, depending on what the format is. So you don't need to know nearly as many cards and their interactions in order to play at a competitive level. So it lowers that barrier to entry, lowers the barrier to knowledge in order for someone to get into the game and to play effectively. But on the flip side, there's a limited lifetime to your cards within that format. So usually if there's a standard format, they also have an eternal format, whether that's just a casual thing or is something competitively viable, is something different, like Teddy talked about with expanded for Pokemon, which would basically be their eternal format.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so it's not going to rotate out. Your deck's not going to rotate out in 2 months. It'll usually take 2 years for it to be gone, but still that deck is only going to be viable for, and those cards are only going to be viable for a certain amount of time. So sometimes people do see it as a loss in order to not be able to continue playing with their favorite deck, or that they have wasted money because it's no longer something that they can quote unquote are allowed to play.
Yeah, I can definitely see like the two different sides of it. And I think being a younger player, being only 18, I've played in a setting where I didn't have as much money, or not being able to go back and buy those cards that are older was harder for me. That's why I never played expanded. And Pokemon and standard was my biggest thing. So I do understand why they do it. And I think it could be also targeted, like I said, like you guys said, for a younger audience, people who may not have as much money, who are still in high school, who can't drive as many places and stuff like that. I do see it as a thing that it's easier for them to get in the game because it's all newer cards. You can go to the store and buy packs of the set you need a card. Like if you need a card from 5-6 years ago, you're going to have to hunt down packs to find that. And usually the packs are going to be a lot more than packs are for the newer sets. So I think that also does help those newer players that are newer to the game that want just an easy intro to the game, like you guys have said. And also, like, I think it does help with the money thing in a way. And yes, your cards may rotate out, but you can also sell your cards to buy newer cards for the sets that are newer in standard. I think is also a viable option. That is a tactic I use a lot, is when cards would rotate, I would sell them a little bit before just to get more money for the newer sets. But that is something I did.
Yeah, I guess the thing that'll remedy some of the stings of the rotating format is being able to also have the other format that we'll be talking about soon, so that you still have an avenue to play those older cards if you aren't wanting to sell them, or if you're still wanting to play those decks because you just really love playing those decks, which I've had that. I've definitely been stung by that before. I know this is more of a digital problem, but Hearthstone, back when they started rotating, they didn't have their wild format, which is their eternal format, for, I want to say, like almost a year, 2 years. So there was a year where I was just sitting there with all these cards that we used to be able to play with, just sitting there digitally, not being able to do anything with them, and having to just see them as money wasted. So, as if you are going to have a rotating, I feel like you do need that avenue for those, for your players to feel like they aren't wasting their money on getting those older cards, and having an avenue to for them to play with them still. So, speaking on having that eternal format, Sean, do you want to explain what exactly that is?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. Eternal formats in any trading card game, they can be basically be boiled down to any card that has been printed in this game's history, excluding banned or restricted cards, obviously. Anything that has been printed into a legal format is legal in the eternal format. So if you look at Magic the Gathering, I think it's all the way back to alpha, right? I think it's everything all the way back to alpha, aside
In vintage
from
format, yeah.
silver bordered cards, which are not legal in any format.
Or legacy. Which
The
one?
eternal
Legacy?
formats,
Yeah, legacy.
yep. That's right. Yeah. All right. So the in Magic the Gathering, the eternal formats, there are multiple, comprise themselves of vintage, legacy, commander, my personal favorite format of Magic the Gathering, and pauper, which is another fantastic format in Magic. These all comprise, they all have different banned and restricted lists. They're all a little bit different. Oh, right. Yep, you're right. My bad. Modern and Pioneer as well. That's a good call. Good call. I always forget about those ones. That's okay, though. And yeah, I think some of the best parts about Eternal, well, really, one of the best parts about Eternal is no matter who you sit down with, no matter what you're sitting down to play, there really are no limitations. I mean, there are a scant few. Obviously, they're banning and restricting certain cards that make the playthrough experience not enjoyable for everyone involved, which I don't think is too bad of an idea personally. Sometimes bans need to happen. So yeah, that's my little introduction to Eternal formats. What are your guys' opinions on them?
I have, like you said, Sean, about rotating. I have a very difficult relationship with those things because, well, I do understand what they're there for. I also like my play style is keeping the game fresh, so obviously for like Lorcana and all that, we'll just have one format for a good solid few years. It's not going to be a thing that we run into very soon. There might be bans and there might be erratas. Like we're just seeing one errata or like change of text on the Maleficent card, but I don't think we're going to see a full format like rotating or eternal for a while, because it's like we don't have enough cards to do that yet. But I think once we do, I would like to see a rotating. I think that would be very nice. Just in my opinion, is how I like to play. It's how I like to keep the game fresh. I don't have really anything against Eternal, but it's just not my favorite. It's not my favorite way to play. For those trying to get in the game, it seems very complex, because if you look at Pokemon's Expanded, which I guess is their Eternal, you have all of the Black and White, all of the XY, all of the Sun and Moon, all of the Sword and Shield sets. That's 4 different franchises or like expansions, and there's 12 sets in each of those, so that's 48 sets plus a bunch of different like subsets and smaller sets they've made. So that's over 50 sets. When you look at it from the big picture in one format, that is very intimidating for new players. And I don't know, that just seems like a lot to me, but I don't know. I think no matter what Lorcana does, I think it'll be fun, but I would like to see a rotating format over an eternal format.
Yeah, for Eternal, for me as someone who likes to collect, I'd like to see all of my cards stay relevant for the most part. So I don't feel like I had to let part of my collection go to the wayside. So I do like the idea of Eternal. And of course, I think, like with most games, they have multiple formats. Like Pokemon pretty much has both. So I wouldn't doubt that maybe Lorcana would do the same. So everyone's happy. But for playing, I do also like rotating because I do like coming up with new deck ideas instead of holding on to one deck and maybe trading out 1 or 2 cards every set, if that. I do like having to come up with new ideas, so I'm an advocate for both. I can go either way. Yeah, I could just go either way and have fun with either format, so I'm not too strong one way or another. I would like to see both, essentially.
I agree. I really hope that we all see multiple variations of these formats in Lorcana, especially since we're all very competitive minded and we're going to be hitting these tournaments for the foreseeable future. They're all going to be rotating formats. Like Teddy said, there's just not a card pool for us to have an eternal, quote unquote, eternal format yet. Look at Digimon. Digimon is up into like their 12th official set or 13th, something like that. Somewhere in there.
They 11 official sets and then like 3 bonus sets, so yeah, like 14 sets.
There we
total.
go. Exactly. See, so and they're still, it's an eternal format aside from their ban list and restricted list. It's an eternal format, so you can use all, I guess what it would be, 15 sets. It'd be all 15 sets card pool, which is getting to be a pretty decent size, but still they're only starting to think about rotation. They haven't even implemented it yet. So you got to figure for the first 3, 4, 5 years, we'll probably be stuck with our rotating formats and tournaments, which, like I said before, it can be a positive, it can be a negative. It will definitely help us all to think on our feet as far as deck building, because when these rotations come up, we're all going to be deck building and testing and running ideas past each other, and it's going to help us greatly. It's just going to, it makes it a constant investment, as opposed to something like when I play Commander, I will build a Commander deck and then it can just kind of hang out how it is until I see like a card that I'm like, oh, I really want that, and then I buy a single. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it helps keep the meta fresh.
Absolutely.
When you rotate. Yeah,
100%. That being said, I'm looking forward to playing both ways eventually. So, just want to play. Darn it! I just want to play.
Give us the cards. I was going to say we should go to their headquarters and bang on their doors.
Oh yeah, totally. Well, first we need to ask for more steel cards because, like, come on now.
That is a good point.
We
Give me
really,
Simba.
really need a new steel card.
Hook is so lonely.
For real though.
Yeah. On the topic of standard versus eternal, I'm very much so really what it comes down to is what is the primary format, because there's always going to be an eternal format because people are always going to want to play with the cards that they have available. There does not necessarily have to be a standard format. But is the question is what is the primary format and how is the game designed with that in mind? And so I'm very much a pro rotating format because of what we talked about earlier with the barrier to entries and creating a better environment for bringing new people into the game, because new people are going to be the lifeblood of any game. If you're not, you're going to have people getting out of the game for a whole variety of reasons constantly. And so if you don't have new people coming in and making it easy for them to get into the game, then the game's going to die off. This is just what it is. And standard is the easiest format for people to get into in general. Now, there's arguments with Commander and Magic and casual formats and things of that nature. But from like a standard organized play type situation, because of those lower barrier to entries. And me, it's also a situation where, like, if I come into a game, like I've been looking at Digimon for a long time, and it's an eternal format, and I look and I'm just like, cool, I want to play this cool deck. Oh, but I need this card that only came in starter decks in wave 1, which was years ago. So the starter decks are either not available anymore or they're stupid expensive, and the singles are stupid expensive. And I'm just like, I don't want to pay $6 for a common, right? Or something that was in a starter deck, and I need 4 of them. Like, it's just a feels bad in my opinion. And it's a larger financial barrier to entry as well in those types of situations. And so that's why I'm very pro standard, is it creates that lowest barrier to entry for people. And if, like, I've been looking into like why Pokemon is so cheap to get into right now, and one of the big reasons, other than the fact that people are just popping boxes like crazy,
Yeah.
is that they made good starter products that are chock full of staples, and they made it to where all of the organized play formats are standard. They completely removed expanded from their competitive scene this year, and that has caused card prices to drop.
Yeah, I will say about that, it was also because of COVID they got rid of expanded. Uh, that was one of the bigger things, just because they wanted to keep it more simpler. Because during the pandemic, a lot of people did get in and start playing online, and what was played online the most was standard. And I think one of the bigger reasons why they kept it around was just because of how many new people, and because, to be honest, the newer generations, they weren't around when Black and White and X and Y were popular. They were around when Sword and Shield and now Scarlet and Violet are starting to become popular. So I think that was one of the reasons, but I also do understand what you're saying there.
Yeah. There are reasons for going to standard. That makes a lot of sense. I had looked into that, but by doing so, they removed a lot of cards from the card pool, and a lot of costs went down, particularly on cards that were available that were like good in standard decks and expanded decks, because now, instead of just having to worry about multiple, it lowered demand essentially, because you didn't have people trying to get all these cards for standard and expanded decks. You just had the people that wanted them in their standard decks. So lower demand, and thus more people, there was more availability. So prices went down. That's why Pokemon is absolutely ridiculously cheap, along with like a lot of other different things. I'm really hoping Lorcana takes after Pokemon in a lot of ways in that respect, because I really want those barrier to entries to be low so that we can get as many people playing and enjoying the game as possible.
Something I don't think any of us have actually touched on yet about eternal formats. One thing that a game company can do to make it easier to break into an eternal format is reprint sets. Much like what Digimon is doing with their next set or the set after. I don't remember. Blake, help me out here.
I think it's maybe three or four sets away if we're going to get it. There's still some debate on whether or not we're going to be getting that set, or if that's going to be Japan only. Or
wow!
Yeah,
really?
Yeah, they're being dicey on it, but hopefully we'll get it. Fingers crossed,
dude. I thought it was like a guarantee that it was just coming over here.
No, they haven't officially confirmed it yet, but yeah, it's hurting the community right now, which goes to show why that's so important to have that, so that everyone can get these older cards that are staples. So people like Sneaky who want to get into the game, they have that cheaper option because it's going to be reprinted.
Right. See, and another example of this is this summer when we are all going to be at Gen Con, Magic the Gathering is releasing their Commander Masters set, which, for those of you that don't know, in Magic the Gathering, a Masters set is a reprint set. There are some new cards included in the set, but they're mainly reprinted for reprints. And Commander Masters is getting one this summer. Unfortunately, it looks like the prices that are online right now, which aren't for sure prices yet, they're upwards of like $300, $400 for a booster box.
Dear Lord.
Yeah. Really hurt me bad because I was really hoping to get a Commander Masters box at Gen Con and then draft. That was really something I was hoping to do with some other Magic the Gathering players that are going to be there. But I don't think I can afford that. I don't think I can justify it.
Yeah, I'm going to go on a little rant. So, yeah,
Please do.
Go ahead.
The whole Commander Masters thing is just such a huge cash grab. Like, so first off, Wizards doesn't get any pats on the back for doing a reprint set because they used to do a reprint set every single year. The whatever edition, ninth edition, 10th edition, 11th edition, 12th edition, those were all reprint sets. You got it every single year, and they haven't done that in forever. Thereby limiting availability, causing more scarcity, etc. Then they come in with these master sets, which they charge basically double what they would for a normal booster set. And we're not even going to talk about the Lord of the Rings one because it's even more expensive. But the master sets particularly is their reprints. So majority of them aren't even new arts. And a lot of times if they are new arts, they're arts that have already been commissioned for that card previously that they chose not to use, but they still control. So their costs are lower because they don't have to pay for new art. They don't have to do anything. They already have the stuff. All they have to do is print the cards, and then they charge double. So it's just the hugest cash grab, and it's completely and utterly ridiculous. But yeah, Ravensburger, learn what not to do from WotC, please.
Yeah, I think just relating this all back to Lorcana, obviously, like I said, we won't have the card pool to do any of this for a hot sec. We're gonna be in this game state with just like, because we're getting our first set August, early September, and then maybe a second, and then possibly, hopefully, a second set by like Christmas time and stuff like that. And then it's 4 sets a year until. And that's like by the end of 2024, that's only 8 sets. So and then at the end of 2025, it's 12 sets. And maybe that's when you start looking at sets and start rotating. So it won't be 2026, 2027, possibly later, till we start seeing things starting to rotate. And just like with what Pokemon has done, with what Magic has done, there's a lot to learn from for Lorcana and Ravensburg, and obviously there's going to be a lot that happens in the next few years before they even have a chance to start rotating cards. And so I think just with Lorcana, they have an opportunity to do the right thing, and like with Pokemon said, with all their stuff that they're putting out with putting all these staples into decks, that is a very good thing for Lorcana to do, and I think they are on the right track with that. With not having, like, if they have promos and stuff, it's going to be cards that are in sets, just a different artwork. There's no like specific promos just to boxes like other games do, and I think that is a good step in the right direction. But then once they start to get to the point where they can rotate, they also have to think, like, okay, what can we do to make sure the game is inviting to everyone who wants to join now? Because like any card game, people are going to find out, or they're going to learn about the game and want to play many years in the future. And so once they do get to that point, I think they also have to sit down and have a good conversation about what do we want to do to make sure this game is the most inviting. And having multiple rotations or formats and having multiple ways to enter the game, I think, is a big thing. And they can learn from a lot of other games and what they're doing. And I think hopefully they do show a good sign of being able to do that once that time point comes in the 2026, 2027 years. That's my little Lorcana call out thingy for this.
Yeah, we probably won't see a rotation until set 12.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's about 3 years.
I do. I know somebody already said something about it. I do want to touch on the idea that the promos that we get are not going to be mechanically exclusive. I think that that's going to be really beneficial. I'm sure it's already been said, but I just wanted to put my 2 cents in as well.
Yeah, but that's definitely a very good thing for the game as well, because that's another thing with Digimon, or basically all the Bandai games, Digimon, One Piece, DBS, is, they've got these like super exclusive promos that are like absolute staples in decks, and once again that just increases the barrier to entry because there's a very limited supply, so they're expensive.
Let's say not even just that, Spencer, but like in Digimon, there are literal promos that aren't printed in English, so only Japanese players can use them. That's a level I've never even heard of before. Like, I've never even experienced that kind of. It's like, okay, these decks can have this promo. We're going to print them for this language of the game, but thousands of our other players just will never be able to legally play this card. That's such an odd move, if you ask me.
Do they have a world championship for Digimon?
They just did nationals this weekend. Nationals.
Yeah, second day is today. Yeah.
So like, I don't know. I'm not sure how it works, but like, I know for when Japan comes and plays in like for Pokemon, when they come and play in their formats and like the world championships, they have to abide by what the rest of the world's rotation is, because they get cards way before we do.
Right.
But they have to then backtrack and go and find and play in our rotation what the US and Europe and basically what the rest of the world does. And I think that kind of it's a weird thing. Like, just why don't they just keep everyone on track? Because for me, if I was a player hailing from Japan who played in those things and then have to make a whole deck for a different rotation after playing in that for the entire year, that's really confusing. And I don't think Digimon doing the reprint set just for Japan will help them, in my mind. And like, that it doesn't make any sense to me.
It's super common in Japanese card games.
I actually had this concern when Lorcana announced where they're going to be distributing to start, and it's these other countries that are going to be a bit behind. So I wonder if we're going to be on the other side of that with Lorcana, depending on how late to the game these other countries get to come to the table. And if we do have these higher tier organized play, if we'll be on that where we had to backtrack a couple sets in order to play on an even field with everyone.
Yeah, I know that MHA, My Hero Academy game, or Academia, had a similar issue where they couldn't get distribution in Australia at first. And so once they did, they released the first couple of sets in that area all at once. And so instead of just buying the first chapter, they had access to the first chapter and the second chapter at the exact same time, and the third chapter came out like a month later. And so that's one option that Lorcana can take, depending on when the timeline of these things. So I know like one of the big things is with the Asiatic region is that Weiss Schwarz currently has the licensing for Disney card games in the Asiatic region. But that ends at some point in 2024. I'm not sure if it's January 1st or if it's later on. But if it's, say, January 1st, then Lorcana could do a similar thing and just release the first chapter and the second chapter at the same time. And then that way everybody's all caught up. But who knows? But yeah, that would be annoying for sure to have to play like last year's meta at like Worlds or whatever because everybody else is behind. Yeah.
See, I'm looking at it from the opposite side. I'm looking at it as we get an extra X amount of time to have practiced with these cards. So once we do know, like closer to when a Worlds type event will be held, we'll know for a fact whether we have to prepare for that or not. And then at that point, we already have X amount of time practicing with these decks, and then we can keep it in mind, and we'll have specific Worlds practicing times when we're going backwards in the meta, pulling out our older decks that we liked, re-practicing and re-refreshing ourselves with those. I think we're going to benefit from it, much like I think Japanese players benefit from it in Pokemon. It is a little annoying, I'm not going to lie there, but I think we will see benefits come out of it.
Oh yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah.
Like one of the other things is like we're on like a whole absolutely other topic than what the podcast episode was on, but this kind of goes into all the same stuff. But one of the other things is so like the Japanese metas are different from the Western metas because the Japanese metas play a best of one format, and the Western metas play a best of three format. Generally, for most games, and so that actually creates a different meta because the consistency of your deck and various other factors are different between those formats, and so you actually see a little bit of a difference in terms of like the actual decks used and the meta breakdown and what's popular and what's winning, depending on which of those two types of formats are used, which is interesting and also creates more of that disparity when it comes to looking at it from a global perspective.
Well, that was our discussion and then some on rotations and formats and what they could bring to the game. But for now, we wanted to thank you all for listening, and we will catch you on the flip side. Thanks for listening, everyone. We are excited to announce we are looking to get a weekly to bi-weekly posting schedule as opposed to our one that we currently have. We can't wait for the next one, but for now, we'll talk soon, and everyone, Glimmer on.